Ladies and gentlemen, very quickly, Lost in Transition, the Nepal narrative, and we have Chandra Gautam, Jayant Prasad, Mallika Shakya in conversation with Bharat Bhushan.
Should I take it out?
Sir. Okay. Good afternoon. I'm Bharat Bhushan. We're going to discuss Mr. Chandra Gautam's book, Lost in Transition, Rebuilding Nepal from the Maoist Mayhem and Mega Earthquake. Let me introduce the panelists. Mr. Gautam is a distinguished diplomat and development professional. He currently serves on the boards of several institutions, charitable foundations, and public-private partnerships. He's active in Nepal civil society, and you can see he's become active as an author. He has served as Deputy Executive Director of UNICEF and Assistant Secretary General of United Nations. He's part of a 4-member eminent persons group set up by the Nepal government, which is proposed to be set up, I'm told, which will review all bilateral agreements with India. We have with us Jayant Prasad. Ambassador Jayant Prasad is the Director General of Institute of Defense Studies and Analysis in New Delhi. He served as India's ambassador to Afghanistan, Algeria, Nepal, and the UN Conference on Disarmament in Geneva. And we have with us Mallika Shakya. Dr. Mallika Shakya is an anthropologist. Her recent research work looks at rise and fall of Nepal's garment industry and its crisscrossing with Maoist movement at the turn of the millennium. Much of her work revolves around South Asia, and she has advised governments in Asia, Africa, Eastern Europe on development. As I said, I'm Bharat Bhushan. I've been a journalist for 25 years. I'm the editor of Catch News, which is a digital portal. I worked with Mail Today. I was its founding editor, with the Telegraph in Delhi, Express News Service, Hindustan Times, and so on. My interest in Nepal goes back, Mr. Gautam, to the first democracy movement. I was part of a group of half a dozen journalists who were taken to Nepal to attend the first meeting of the then banned Nepali Congress in Ganesh Man Singh's house.
Yeah.
So this meeting took place with all the Nepal army soldiers surrounding that house, and here were people talking about democracy at that time. And since then, I've gone to Nepal at least twice or thrice a year. I covered the second democracy movement. I got tear gas in Nepal, never in India, but in Nepal, and learned that if you want to escape tear gas, you have to put fluoride toothpaste under your eyes and in your nose. Did you know that? Anyway, so my experience of Nepal is a very friendly experience of Nepal, a sympathetic experience of Nepal. So I'll be in conversation with these people about the book, but we'll take off from the book and talk about Nepal's politics as it exists today. So Mr. Gautam, first of all, let me tell you how much I've enjoyed reading your book. I've not agreed with a lot of it, but I've enjoyed reading it. But you're a rare Nepali because you don't mince your words. You're very straightforward. You call a spade a spade. You don't hesitate in taking names. I mean, I would fare to tread that path, but you know, you've been very bold. But what I liked about, let's say, your persona as an author is that you were offered, twice you were offered by the monarch, King Gyanendra. He offered you a cabinet position. You refused. He offered you to become, he said he'll appoint you as chairman of the planning commission. You refused, and you remained an unrepentant Democrat. And you know, so hats off to you for your commitment to democracy.
Thank you.
But let me begin by asking you what really disturbed me about the book, which is that there is an undercurrent of anger in the book. Now, I can understand that anger because you are angry at what has become of your country. You were away for almost 40 years with UN.
Yeah.
And you're sort of an observer from outside. So you're angry at what's happened to your country. But is there also an anger there that when you come back after 40 years, nobody wants to make use of your experience? You've got, as your book shows, you've got solutions for various things. But there is no forum, nobody who would take that forward. Is that an unfair reading of the book?
Well, I would say, first of all, it is not anger. It is more a disappointment.
Okay.
Because, you know, as a Nepali who has served in an international organization in many countries with the United Nations, I have seen how many other countries with less resources, less potential, have made tremendous progress for the development of their countries. Nepal has got such extraordinary resources, and still we have not made the kind of progress that we can make. So it is the disappointment that despite the tremendous potential, we have not made sufficient progress. And I would say it is not the latter part. The use of my expertise, that is not important to me. I have had a full life, I have had a great career, I'm a private citizen, I'm enjoying thoroughly. I'm not, as you see in the book, looking for any position or anything. That's not important.
You're not disappointed that you were not appointed chairman of the Reconstruction Commission? Or
not at all.
Not at all?
In fact, I would turn that down,
Okay.
partly because I want to remain independent, I want to remain a free citizen, I want to be able to speak my voice, I don't want to be compromised with this party or that party, so it suits me perfectly.
All right, fair enough. Now let's talk about some of the developments that have taken place in Nepal and how you viewed them. Jayant, it's been claimed by some people that the Maoists at one time had royal patronage, support, maybe not direct but indirect. You would remember that at one point Prachanda put Baburam Bhattarai under house arrest wherever they were in the jungle, because Dr. Baburam Bhattarai was arguing that monarchy is a bigger enemy and not India, while Prachanda thought that India was the bigger enemy and not the monarchy at that time. Okay, so things came to a head that this man was disarmed, so was his wife, and so were his supporters, and they were confined. Now, which is the more plausible interpretation? That the Maoists used the monarchy, as Mr. Gautam suggests, because they apparently they wanted to rule. If the king would only give them political power, they would support the monarch. Or is it more plausible that the monarchy used the Maoists to condition the existing political parties?
It's an interesting question because I think both used each other, and the Maoist insurgency started in 1996 with Baburam Bhattarai handing over a 40-point demand to the then government. And the Nepal army came into play several years later, and the king actually held the Nepal army back from the conflict because there were secret confabulations between the Maoists and the monarchy to beat a common enemy, a protagonist or the people that are supported very strongly in Chandra Gautam's book, The Democrats in Nepal. But before getting into this question, I wanted to say a word about Nepal's development in the past, and I'm being an advocate not for how Nepal has turned out, but for its considerable achievement. Because of wrong economic policies, Nepalese per capita incomes are now trending down to half of the average of South Asian incomes. But in one distinct area, which is the Human Development Indices, Nepal has done better than India, for instance, in combating child malnutrition, in infant and maternal mortality, and the rate at which Nepal has been able to combat poverty. So these are considerable accomplishments which have been made possible by the genius of the Nepalese people. So you can imagine what can happen if they have the right type of government. Going back to your question, just one more sentence.
But, yeah, shortly.
That whole episode lasted for a very long period, 7-8 years, and when the monarchy turned against the Maoists, it turned also curiously and foolishly against the democratic forces simultaneously. And so if there were 3 forces in Nepal, 2 of them came together, and the monarchy in Nepal became the victim of its own politics because that caused the end of the monarchy in Nepal.
Yep. Mallika, these 2 forces came together, the Maoists and the Democrats. But for the Maoists, democracy initially was only a tactical move. Nobody was sure whether they wanted to become full-time Democrats and they believed in multi-party democracy, or whether multi-party democracy was a way to fulfill their other agenda. Now today, when you look back, do you think Maoists have remained, their commitment to democracy has remained tactical, or those who are in the mainstream politics, those who are in parliamentary politics, those Maoists are actually now committed to democracy per se?
That's a really interesting question and very, very topical as well. I think because I remember when Baburam Bhattarai, as the finance minister, actually came to the World Bank in Washington, D.C., and I was there when this was one of the first kind of foreign visits that he was making. And there were several questions to him about, is joining the kind of seven-party alliance to fight this kind of popular movement against the king. Is that tactical for you, or is it for good? And he had said several times that, okay, in our lifetime, in my lifetime, I'm done with the People's War. I can't guarantee what would happen in the next generation, but me as a person, I mean, I can give you my commitment that this is for good. Now, he was not at all believed at that point, right? And there were several questions about how would you know when a revolutionary has in fact turned a Democrat? Can it ever happen per se? But looking back now, you know, about over a decade after, I mean, what probably was the underlying factor then, and we didn't know about it because the Maoists were underground, and now we know better, is the inter-party dimensions. And I think this came up in Ambassador Prasad's kind of answer as well, that the two-line struggle, which has become a kind of, you know, core area of discourse for a certain faction within the Maoists, have now come to the surface, and the Maoist party has now split it into so many different sections, including Bharat Bhatt himself has now joined a force called Naya Shakti, and he says that this new party, if he is ever going to register it, will not have the name communism or Maoism in its name per se.
Doesn't matter. So what, besides Mohan Vaidya, every other faction today is for democracy, you're saying?
I mean, their commitment at that time of democracy had some degree of earnesty, I would say, in retrospect.
You wrote a letter to Prachanda, which you never sent. So first of all, why did you write a long letter and didn't send it? I mean, it doesn't make any sense. You write a letter, you should send it.
That's right.
That is one. And secondly, you say that history will judge Maoists very harshly in that letter. Now, from the vantage point of the present, do you still judge them harshly, or do you think they made some progress towards democracy, as Mallika has been saying?
Well, first of all, why did I write a letter and didn't send it? Actually, I wrote that letter when I was in a hospital, had a kidney transplant, but had a lot of time to think and reflect about it. And as I saw the civil war worsening, we said the solution lies in the hands of the Maoists. So I put forth a lot of suggestions. Right at that time, the Maoists had a big convention in which they said, okay, they will actually come to negotiated terms. In fact, they approached India. India facilitated the 12-point agreement. So because of that, I said, maybe there is no need. They were self-correcting themselves, so I don't need to send the letter.
Then why did you publish it now?
Say that again?
Why was the need to publish it now?
Because as I look back, I think many of the things that I had suggested they ought to do, they could have done. If they had done, they would not have gotten into the kind of trouble they are in, and the country would have been spared the terrible aftermath of their rebellion.
I think you should have found time to post it, and maybe things would have been different, but that's a very iffy thing. Mallika, let me just come back to you before I go to Ambassador Prasad. Why did Nepal see a Maoist insurgency in 1996? It wasn't as if there was no democracy in Nepal at that time. There was a democratic government in power. There was a constitution which they had adopted in 1991, I think. It wasn't as if the corruption in Nepal was any more than that of other developing countries. So, and the democratic government had come after a people's movement. It wasn't as if it had been gifted by the king. So why did Nepal see insurgency at that time of the Maoist kind?
That's again another great question, and this takes me back to perhaps what Partha Chatterjee had said about the politics of the governed. When you don't have legitimacy, what do you do, right? And in this discussion, okay, the 1990s, it was a democratic country. Was there a ground for non-democratic kind of armed struggle at that time? And this is where I'm reminded of perhaps Nandini Sundar and Amita Bhaviska's response to Partha Chatterjee, that the neoliberalism in the 1990s, following what Francis Fukuyama called end of history and the last standing man, where there is no international kind of contestations to this as the way of governance. I mean, in some ways in Nepal, I sense that they had talked about, there was a very Hindi film kind of dialogue that they had said that what is the worst that can happen to you is, okay, put him in the ultimate evil that can happen to you is put him in the liquid oxygen. The liquid will not let you live. Oxygen will not let you die. The ultimate worst. In some ways, exactly, yeah. So in some ways, the neoliberalism, the combination of neoliberalism in Nepal that took roots after the democratization, because it happened in the neoliberal era, and its combination with the very entrenched degree of feudalism that didn't go away, made turn that rule into a kind of twin-headed beast that had to be tackled somehow. Now, I'm not kind of justifying the Maoist movement on that, but I'm just kind of suggesting that just because Nepal had democracy, which was a tactical democracy, deliberative democracy, but it didn't completely uproot feudalism. And maybe it's important to kind of understand that context in kind of understanding subaltern politics.
So let's leave this for a bit, Jayant. In Mr. Gautam's book, he has claimed, and I quote, after the end of the insurgency, India at times actually brokered deals to put the Maoists in power in Kathmandu, particularly during the tenure of Jayant Prasad as Indian ambassador to Nepal, 2010 to 2012, unquote. Now, did you do any such thing? Were you brokering deals to put the Maoists in power over the existing political parties?
Well, let's not put Mr. Gautam in a corner.
No, I'm putting you in a corner.
No, I'm not in a corner because I was not in Nepal when the Maoists came to power in Nepal. And when Dr. Baburam Bhattarai's government, when the second Maoist government was being formed in Nepal, it was constituted on 29th of August, 2011. And in consultation with the government of India and the powers that be, including the then Prime Minister, I fixed my date of arrival in Nepal and presenting my credentials a day before the government was constituted, in order that I would have the goodwill across the political spectrum in Nepal. And that served me very well because Nepal afterwards, during my tenure, had to face another problem. I wish Mr. Gautam had checked his facts because I was not there in 2010.
Okay, we'll request him to correct it in the next edition.
But the interesting thing is that I want to go back to your first comment, where you talk about the anger in the book about the Maoists. I must tell you, Mr. Gautam, that you must admire the Nepali left, which is very different from the Indian left. We had our Naxalite movement in '67.
Yeah.
And I have visited Naxalbari before going to Nepal because I wanted to understand the problems in the border area. So I went around the entire India-Nepal border before coming to Kathmandu. My first stop was in Naxalbari, where I met Jungle Santhal's widow and some workers from the old days. And they told me that 2 years after the Naxalbari movement started on the Indian side of the border, on the adjoining Nepali side, the same thing happened. The heads of a few landlords were chopped off, and the people involved in that movement were locked up for many years in prison, including the present Prime Minister of Nepal, Mr. Oli, who was in prison for 17 years for that. But look at what has happened to the Nepali counterpart Naxalites and our Naxalites. Our Naxalites are represented in the third tier of Indian democracy, which is the Panchayati Raj institutions. They are not to be seen in parliament. They are not ministers in state governments or the central government. Nepali members of the Communist Party of Nepal United Marxist-Leninist, which grew out of the Naxalite movement, they have had a succession of prime ministers, including a prime minister with whom Mr. Gautam was an advisor on the peace process, Mr. Madhav Kumar Nepal. Before that, Manmohan Adhikari, and after him, Jhalanath Khanal. And look at the Maoists in India. The Maoists in India are still at war with the Indian state. The Maoists in Nepal have transformed themselves to have produced 2 prime ministers through a democratic process. So there is a lot about Nepalese flexibility and Nepalese genius for compromise, which you have forgotten about in the book.
Yeah, but can I just say that the 2 wars are completely different? I asked this question of Dr. Baburam Bhattarai, who said, we are fighting for bourgeois democracy in Nepal. Your Naxalites are fighting against bourgeois democracy. So the 2 fights are different and will face different kind of hurdles. Right. And the rates of success would be very different indeed. Mr. Gautam, you're pretty damning about the Maoists in general. If I didn't know you better, I would say you are congenitally anti-Maoist, but you actually you defend yourself quite well. But you are against Maoists by and large. There have been 2 Maoist prime ministers, Prachanda and Baburam Bhattarai. Now, when you look at their tenure, who was a better prime minister, Prachanda or Bhattarai?
Well, I think they were equally good or equally bad, as you may want to say it.
No, that's a cop-out.
For the following reasons. That they both had wonderful, when they became prime minister, they had tremendous goodwill of the Nepali people, of the Nepali public, of the international community, because first time when Prachanda came to power, through elections, wow, he could have done tremendous, his socio-economic agenda, he could have pushed it forward. What did he do? He went into completely secondary issues like the priests in the Pashupatinath temple, they should not be Indian. It's a nonsense kind of issues. Or other minor issues, he got into trouble with the Nepal army instead of focusing on the socio-economic agenda. Great missed opportunity. Baburam Bhattarai, more goodwill for Baburam Bhattarai than for anybody else when he became Prime Minister. He was educated, young people looked up to him, and again, what did he do? He tried to do a few good things. He expanded the roads in the Kathmandu Valley, but he became victim of the same thing, that he was supposed to fight against corruption. His wife was considered, he was uncorrupt, but his wife was considered among the most corrupt persons. He tried to bring about development, but what did he do? He created this Yuba Sorozgar program, which is basically employing the Maoist YCL members. So he missed the opportunity to do good things. Although he did, to his credit, with Jayantji's encouragement and all of our encouragement, contribute in the end to the peace process. I think it was during his time that in the end the peace came.
So let me quickly ask you one more question therefore, because you brought in Jayant. Because in your book you also say that you compare Ambassador Rakesh Sood's tenure with Ambassador Jayant Prasad's tenure. And you say, you praise Rakesh Sood for being tough on the Maoists. And as for Jayant, you say, unquote, he became the darling of the Maoists as he took a much softer position vis-a-vis the Maoists. Although you qualify that by saying that Maoists had mellowed down considerably by that time and they were out of power. Now, my question to you is, what purpose would it have served for the Indian ambassador to be tough with the Maoists when there's no prospect of their coming into power and when they're delegitimized by the voters in any case?
But my understanding is the following. I think both ambassadors, Rakesh Sood and Jayant Prasad, were the right ambassador at the right time. Rakesh Sood was ambassador at a time when the Maoist hubris was great. We have won the election. We can do what we could not win in the battlefield. We are going to win in the Constituent Assembly, imposing their agenda, pressing it very hard. There was tremendous arrogance, and I think Rakesh Sood played a role, saying, "Hey, hold it. You know, we are watching you." The international community, and at that time, the international community seemed to be quite sympathetic to the Maoist agenda. Rakesh Sood knew better, like Jayantji knows better, what the Naxalites or the Maoists are, so I think he took a position that was restraining to them. By the time Jayantji came, Maoists had already mellowed, and it was clear that without their support, the peace process would not end. So I think Jayantji played the right role at that time, reaching out to the Maoists, being more friendly to the Maoists, and they responded also, and that, in fact, it ended up producing good results. The peace process was concluded during that time.
I must have misread the book because it was written in praise.
Yeah.
Okay. Jayant, as far as international community is concerned, one of the things that Mr. Gautam argues in the book is that international community was also the darling of the Maoists, if you like. And he singles out the UNMIN mission, the United Nations International Mission in Nepal. Ian Martin initially, and then Karen Langred later on. Now, my question to you is, those are his views, and I think I share them broadly that yes, there was some amount of sympathy for Maoists coming into the democratic process. If I were there, I would also be sympathetic to people who are giving up arms and coming into the mainstream process. But that's not the point. The point is, if the UN mission had continued in Nepal, would peace have become possible? Would this constitution have been written? Because a lot of people believe, and I think he believes, that because UNMIN ended its mission in 2011, that political progress became possible.
Bharat, there I am in 100% agreement with Mr. Gautam.
Yep.
I think he had the right assessment from the start.
Yep.
It was good to involve the international community, particularly the UN political office in Nepal, at a time when some confidence had to be created. But just as the Indian representatives in the UN headquarters, we were not members of the Security Council that time. And I'm really happy because you are an insider of the system in the UN. You watched the debates, and when India intervened in the Security Council on the question of Nepal, our voice was heard, although we were not a member of that body. And much of the representation out of Kathmandu by international civil servants were corrected by our perspectives there, which reflected the sense of what the Nepalese people were feeling. And what happened ultimately, and there again I'm in agreement with the main thrust of your book, and what I like about your book. While it is deeply pessimistic at one level, attributing blame for what Nepal has not become to the Maoists entirely, something that I don't share, just as Bharat perhaps doesn't share. What I like about your book very greatly is also the optimism that you have, a strong faith in how the Nepalese people will be wedded to democracy and positive and purposive change in the coming years. And because of that, it's very surprising that in Nepal, the entire range of political parties from the extreme right, excluding the monarchists who were out of the reckoning by then, they supported the idea of getting UNMIN out and resolving their problems themselves. And I'll tell you, Bharat, there was an extraordinary achievement which has not been seen in any conflict-ridden area in any part of the world, and I have served in many. My first ambassadorship was in the 90s in Algeria, where there is a problem still raging today. In Nepal, the former members of the insurgent group, the members of the People's Liberation Army, are now members of the Nepal Army. The two armed groups in Nepal, which were at loggerheads with each other, which were killing each other, they are now together. Absolutely. This is an accomplishment that you have not seen anywhere else.
Absolutely, absolutely. Now, let's move on to another contentious issue, Mallika, that is of federalism. Now, what are the arguments against federalism in Nepal, especially ethnic identity-based federalism?
I mean, the arguments, I'm sure my panelists can kind of add more to it, but my initial assessment of the argument is against the federalism is twofold. One is that it's economically inefficient, so we would end up creating huge bureaucracies that are already not functioning in Kathmandu. We are replicating these bureaucracies in several other federal provinces. The country just cannot afford to. That's one criticism against it. And the second is this kind of nationalistic fear of disintegration of the country, that by acknowledging multiple cultural national identities, we might be giving ammunition to the future secessionist sort of argument. And I think these are the two arguments against it. And as an anthropologist, what I would say, not as a political scientist, and also not as a kind of specialist of the bureaucracy, in some ways this demand for federalism has been in the political table for too long now to take it away. Yeah. I mean, that might alone be a reason why we cannot be anti-federalist now. I mean, being anti-federalist in 2004, 2001, 2006 is quite different from being anti-federalist now. The second thing is, I mean, maybe this is kind of me being cynical, that Nepal has squandered its wealth historically for so long to a certain extent that to call federalism accountable on economic efficiency is somehow being overly selective, right? Maybe the economic rationality has to be considered when there is minimum degree of stability.
Okay. Well, that's the argument you also make, where you say that don't create too many Bantustans.
Yeah.
Yeah, but let me ask you something different. You make an astounding statement. You say that identity is not the defining characteristic of 21st century. Now, I thought it sounds right that it isn't. But if you look around, you find evidence to the contrary. For example, you look at the Syrian conflict. What is it about? It's about identity, Shia Sunnis. You look at the Sunni kingdom that the Islamic State wants to create. You look at the Wahhabi identity that the Taliban want to create. You look at Saudi Arabia and Iran conflict, again Shia Sunni identity. You look at Myanmar, 14 big insurgencies based on ethnicity. Sri Lanka, Tamil insurgency, which has recently ended. You look at India's northeast, identity-based ethnicities. So, in fact, are we not seeing the resurgence of identity-based politics rather than the end of it?
What I see is that after the end of the Cold War, in fact, Cold War ended, but another kind of identity-based politics spun all over the world, particularly in Eastern Europe, Soviet Union, where many federations there had been suppressed, their identity had been suppressed, so it was natural for identity to come out. I think the point I'm trying to make is that in Nepali politics, too often many false promises are given. Oh, get rid of constitutional monarchy and have multi-party, everything will be okay. Have a federal system, everything will be okay. It's a kind of wrong promises based on more on faith than on evidence. So the point that I'm trying to make is that in the world as a whole, there are many countries that are multi-ethnic. but not many of them are federal, and even fewer of them are
Fair enough.
ethnicity based.
Fair
And
enough.
how many success stories and failure stories there are. So what my plea is, don't look to identity based solution as the solution, because what do your children, my children, all of our children want? They want prosperity, they want education, they want health, they want economic opportunity. If identity based politics gives you that, fine. But identity is not the solution. It is not the aspiration of young people. It is very convenient for political parties to use to arouse their cadre. And in Nepal, during the insurgencies, the Maoists used it, not because they believed in identity politics. After all, Marxist-Leninists, they believe in class, not in identity, but because that was beneficial, just like Lenin and Stalin did in the old days. Join our revolution, you will have your own kingdom. So it was false promises, and anything based on false promises is not going to yield the right
Only
results.
one qualification, which is that no constitution is a concrete building. It's always an article of faith. You say, this is the kind of house, this is the kind of nation I'm going to build. So you can't say that, shouldn't have faith in the constitution, because there's no guarantee it will be delivered. It is a document of faith. Indian constitution is a document of faith. Anyway, Jayant, we are running out of time, so very short answers, because I'm sure people would want to ask questions. The author blames India for the blockade, the so-called blockade, on Madhesi and Tharu issues. Now, in fact, Mr. Gautam, along with some prominent citizens, publicly denounced India for the blockade. Now, do you agree that India has supported this blockade on Nepal either directly or indirectly?
Not at all.
Are you speaking as an independent person or as somebody who has been part of
Well, this is
government
the
of
first
India?
opportunity I have to express myself on this.
Yeah.
I was writing about Nepal till before the constitution was done. And unfortunately, the manner in which Nepal went about writing the constitution was contrary to the spirit in which constitutions have been written in polities that are far more divisive in South Asia. Like in Pakistan, the constitution of 72 was adopted by consensus. Like in Bhutan, the constitution 3 years ago was adopted by consensus. The king went district to district talking about democracy in Bhutan, and he actually forced it down his people's conscience.
Look, my question was about the blockade. I mean,
no,
I agree with you on all these
No,
things.
so the problem is we saw the problems developing because our leadership gave a very clear general message to Nepal that don't go by majoritarianism, try to have the widest measure of consensus, try to accommodate different interests. After all, Tony Hagen, you are an anthropologist, this great social scientist who devoted his life to Nepal, wrote in The Kingdom of the Himalayas that Nepal is the ethnic turntable of Asia. So there are ethnicities in Nepal the same way that there are in India. And we solved our federalism question more easily. I granted that Nepal had no previous experience of federalism, and we had in 1935 under British India we had states and they didn't have, and we solved our problem in an ingenious way because our constitution doesn't use the words federal or federalism.
Absolutely.
But we divided the powers between the center and states in a way that India is an integrated country today. It wouldn't have been if we did not have
You're
federalism.
not answering my question. I agree with all these things. Was India behind the blockade? Or
Not
yes
at
or
all.
no?
It is an indigenous movement because 40 people in Tarai died in protests against the constitution before the promulgation of the constitution. What kind of constitution was promulgated when there was celebration in the Kathmandu Valley and killing and curfew in the
Mr. Gautam,
lower half of the country?
Is India behind the blockade? Yes or no? I really don't have time.
The answer is clearly yes,
Okay.
but perhaps it needs a little bit of explanation.
Okay, so maybe in the question and answer session. Now, a question to you, Mallika. During the blockade also, people have used the China card in Nepal. Now, this China card, it's a big bogey. The king used it, the traditional democratic parties used it. Now, can trade and transit with China ever replace trade and transit with India? Can Nepal fight geography?
But I actually have to say that this idea of China card being mentioned, I've read it a lot more in the Indian press than in Nepali press. I mean, I live in Delhi and I'm a Nepali, so I read everything that comes out of Nepal. So in some ways, the way it has become a card, because it has been used so many times, is actually true on this side of the border than on the other side of the border, where people, even if it might have been used, everybody who has used is aware of the irony that this is part humor, part kind of satire, and not raised in a kind of intentional way that I see on this side of the board.
Well, I disagree with you personally, but this is not, I'm only a moderator here. So my last question to you, Mr. Gautam. You've been appointed to this group of 4 eminent people by Prime Minister Oli. Apparently the formal orders haven't come. But you are tasked with examining and reviewing all bilateral agreements with India. Now, is this an anti-India move? Is it a pro-Nepal move? Which are the agreements which need to be reviewed and rewritten?
Actually, first of all, a minor correction, as you said. I have not been appointed. There has been some discussion apparently in which my name has come. And if it comes, I'll be happy. It is neither anti-India nor anti-Nepal. It is both pro-Nepal, pro-India, because it has been proposed by both sides, have agreed to form such a group. And it has taken a long time for it to be formed. If it is formed, I think it will be a good thing, because there are so many misunderstandings about Nepal-India relations, tremendous exaggerations by people on the left and people on the right. I think time has come for a group of wise, dispassionate people to sit together, analyze, and propose some solutions to some of the misunderstandings that are there. There are many agreements. I think many agreements, the Nepalis sometimes call them unequal agreements, but I would say my own opinion. I do not represent the government. I'm a free citizen.
Okay, all right.
And those agreements, actually, even the unequal parts are often very beneficial for Nepal. And there are certain unequal parts that are perhaps relevant in the 1950s for India, but I think it would be in India's interest today for us to revise some things in a mutually agreeable, not one against the other, as a win-win solution.
I agree with him.
All right. On that happy note, we are going to end this discussion, and we have about 7 minutes for questions.
Just 2 questions. We have about 4 minutes.
All right. That's what the organizers want, so be it. Yeah, okay. Please identify yourself and address yourself to a particular panelist. Don't say it is for all the panelists, because then it will take up all the time.
Well, that's exactly what I was going to say, because I'm not looking for a particular response. It is open to the panel. I'm a journalist, and just out of personal curiosity, I'd like to know, do you think Nepal's foreign policy, there might be a change vis-a-vis India and China's deferring response to the protests? Do you think Nepal is going to continue with its normal relations with India, or do you think there might be a change or tilt towards China?
Okay.
May I?
Sure.
Well, first of all, let me say, I'm one of those who does not believe in conspiracy theory. I'm not one of those who believes in playing the China card. I think that is all nonsense. Nepal and India are destined to be together. Our progress is mutual. China can never replace India. However, it's a good idea for any country, for any organization in the world, not to be overly dependent on one country, to diversify one's relationship. So there will be diversification, which will be good not only for Nepal, it will be good for India also.
Absolutely.
And we can do it in such a way that both India, China, Nepal, it's a win-win-win proposition. That will happen, that should happen. And I think Indians should not be paranoid about, oh, Nepal is going too close to China. Don't worry, that is not going to happen. We will always be with India. India's support will be very important for Nepal's development. And it's only foolish extra left and extreme right that talk about playing the China card, not sensible people in the middle.
All right. You had a question here.
Good day to the panel. I just have a very short question closer to home. I want the panel to talk about, to throw some light on the condition the people face right now. What does the future hold for Nepal now? And if you could please elaborate it in respect with class. What does the middle class, the challenges are very different that they feel and that they face than those of the lower class, if you will.
Okay. Well, I would say, what does the future hold for Nepal? I would say in the medium to long term, very bright. Nepal has fantastic potential for development for all, for lower class, middle class, this caste, that caste, etc. I think Nepal has a fantastic future. I'm worried that in the short term, the title of my book, Lost in Transition, we're trying to get out of transition, But I'm worried that it will take a long time, still some more time for us to get out of the transition.
We're going to take one more
If we begin to focus from this excessive obsession with political transition to rule of law, good governance, economic development, that will lift everybody, including the middle classes, the lower classes, and upper classes. Nepal's future is tremendously bright.
Jayant, you want to add something?
Just one sentence that, you know, the actor and director Devanand,
Yeah.
how much he loved Nepal and
Yes.
Nepalese. He used to say Nepal is a God-gifted country. And in answer to the last question, I am also an optimist like you are, because Nepal's natural endowments are second to none in Asia. And given a chance, and if the politics is right and if the elites get their act together, Nepal will be the richest country, not in South Asia, but in Asia. But we are still distant from it right
All right,
now.
Okay,
Yeah.
quickly,
I
if you're
have just
running out
one
of time, I need
sentence
to
to
take one
add.
more
I
question.
mean, the answer on class and caste have been already provided, but I wanted to add the notion of gender. And on this note, I think Nepal has very little grounds to be optimistic, because Nepal has now, with this constitution, become the only country in South Asia where Nepali mothers are not allowed to confer their citizenship to their children, as opposed to Nepali fathers who can. So this is a very unequal treatment, and I hope that on this also we'll have slightly optimistic sort of support from all constituents.
Okay, last question
We
from the
can't
gentleman.
have it, the time of session is
One
over.
more. No,
It's
he's been waiting for a long time.
it
Just
is-
quick
oh.
question, quick question.
after the.
All right, so
The section.
You can have a chat with him off the stage.
we've been censored, so. All right, okay.
Okay.
All right, thank you very much. You've been a lovely audience. Thank
Thank
you,
you.
Mr. Kulchandra
Thank you.
Gautam,
Thank you.
Ambassador
Thank you.
Jayant Prasad, Mallika. Thank you for participating in this discussion.
Mallika, you gave
We
a very
thank
interesting.
Chandra Gautam, Jayant Prasad, Mallika Shakya, and Bharat Bhushan for a lovely, lovely conversation. Can we have a round of applause for them, please?